Hi guys, and welcome to Freckle Finance. Today I thought it would be good to do another budgeting video since they seem to be the most popular videos, and I thought let's start with the most important thing to make sure you are not spending too much money on, and that's housing costs. The reason I thought it would be a good idea to go more in depth on housing costs in regards to budgeting is that it really is the biggest part of your budget that's most expensive, and if you don't have this in line, it's very hard to get out of debt. It's hard to have any savings, to think about retirement, or just to even be in a comfortable budget. So it's very important that your housing costs are within budget. As I've said in a previous video on budgeting, the amount that you can afford to have for housing is different for everyone, or there are different scenarios. Some people do not need to drive a car, and generally those areas will have more expensive houses, and rent will be more expensive there. And so you can kind of take the cost that you would have for a car and add that onto your rent. But generally the recommended amount is, I guess they say 33% of your gross income. I don't like working with gross. Gross means absolutely nothing. The more money you make, the more taxes you get taken off, and it's not a good comparison at all. So I'm gonna say that it's really 35% of your net income that you should be not spending any more than. However, if you're like us and you're really into being financially independent at a young age, or really into saving and investing and just being prepared financially for anything that could come up in your future, I would recommend you don't spend more than 25% of your net income. As well, since I said that some people do not own cars and they live in an area where they don't need to, I would say you can add up to 15% to the section of housing costs if you live in an area where you never plan to buy a car, or while you live in that place that you do not plan to buy a car. You can probably add an additional 15% because that's the recommended amount for transportation. However, I'm pretty sure most people actually go over that amount on transportation, but that is the guidelines, and that's what you should. So, 35%, that's 50% for some people, or for us, that would be around 40% we wouldn't want to increase by. Now, remember with these percentages, I'm including all housing costs. This is not your mortgage or simply your rent. This is all costs that go into housing. Now, if you rent, usually it is just the cost of your rent and utilities. However, some people live in a house, they rent a house where they may have to do some maintenance like gardening and mowing the lawn and such, and that would need to be included in the cost of housing. But if you own a house, this is insurance, it's utilities, it's property taxes, your mortgage, anything that goes into the house cost, which maintenance too. Maintenance is a big one. Maintenance is probably the biggest one that people do not properly account for. But as well, it's kind of hard to know how much maintenance a house is going to need. The newer the house is, the less likely it needs a lot of money in maintenance. The older the house, the more money you should be allocating to it. Now, you can maybe find out problems it's had in the past and kind of estimate, or find out what repairs they've had recently, so you can kind of gauge how much you're probably going to need. But the general rule, which is kind of a little too general to really base how much you should spend on, is 1% of the cost of the house per year. So if you have a $300,000 house, that's $3,000 a year you're supposed to allot towards maintenance. Now, that's probably a lot more. People probably do not count this at all when they're figuring out how much they should spend on purchasing their home, but that is very, very important. You will need to fix stuff. You own this place. Your furnace might go out. You may need your roof repaired. All sorts of things can go wrong with a house, and you need to have money set aside for that, because you do not want to be going into debt for repairing your house. As well, even my friends who have recently purchased homes and they knew that there was going to be costs to go into home ownership, all of them have commented to me that there is a lot more that they need to spend on a house than they expected when they first purchased the house. So keep that in mind. It's going to be more money than you spend. So maybe come up with your estimated maintenance amount, add a few more dollars or whatever to the price, because home maintenance is very hard to predict, but you do not want to go into debt to be able to fix something in your house. So now on to why is it important that we follow these guidelines for how much you should spend on housing. As humans, we have this need to enjoy life, And it's much harder to enjoy your life when you're house poor and you're spending all your money on your rent or all your money on just your housing costs, your mortgage and everything. And you won't be able to enjoy life properly because you will be stressing about your money. And when I say have money to enjoy your life, I'm not saying to become so consumeristic, you're buying all these things that you don't really need. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being comfortable in saving. You know, you still need to buy food. Most people still need a vehicle, or most people want a vehicle, and you want to be able to afford these things. Foods, small day trips, things that enrich your life. You can't afford them if you're spending all your money on your house. As well, I've read that Canadians are some of the worst for spending on housing, that on average we spend 43% of our gross income on housing. Gross. That doesn't even include taxes that get deducted, which is a huge chunk of your gross income is taken out for taxes, especially the higher income that you make. So that's a lot of money. Where are you buying, where are you able to afford your food and such like that? You just need to have a comfortable wiggle room in your budget. And here's another important point. When you're spending more money on housing, you're likely living in a higher income area, a nicer neighborhood, and along with that comes a lot of other things. Nicer cars are expected from your neighbors, luxury vehicles, fancy vacations, name brand clothing, high-end restaurants. So when you save money on housing by being in a more reasonable neighborhood where people tend to spend less, you will also save more money in other areas of your life. And you won't even feel like you're missing out because you will be on par with your neighbors. And the kind of keeping up with the Joneses mentality that a lot of these nicer neighborhoods have, they don't make your life better. They probably actually make your life worse because you're constantly feeling like you're missing out instead of just really appreciating what you do have in life. Consumer goods is not what brings happiness in your life. As well, most people think that you're like a rich person when you're living in these neighborhoods and you're living like the rich. But in fact, most of the millionaires in North America do not live in these high-end luxury neighborhoods. They live in your average middle-class home. They drive used cars, generally around 5 years old. And you know, you're living when you're trying to have the nicest place and living in the nicest neighborhood, you're trying to live a life that is false. You know, that's not who you actually are. You don't have all that money because you're not saving for your future at the same time. If you can afford a luxury neighborhood while saving for your future and really having a solid retirement plan, then by all means, go ahead and do it. But the vast majority of North Americans do not have that kind of money. As well, although 35% of your net income may seem like a small amount for some people, leaving 65% of your net income for other important expenses leaves a lot of room to be able to be comfortable and not stress about your finances. And seriously, stressing about your finances, it keeps people up at night. It breaks up marriages and relationships. It ruins families. You don't want to live your life stressing about your finances. And really, not stressing about your finances is probably the biggest life value you can get out of making sure that you don't spend too much money on housing. And as well, keeping things within the 35%, you will very likely be able to still go to restaurants and have small trips. This is for the average income, of course, but you will still be able to afford little luxuries in life while maintaining the 35% home. And for the average family, it's not a bad neighborhood that you're living in. So yes, some people live in more expensive areas. Some people do not make enough income to afford neighborhoods. And I'm not really gearing this lecture on those people because that's a whole other issue. This is about people who choose to spend way more money than they need to get the best house they can get. And I'm trying to convince you this is not what you should do. You should stay within your budget and appreciate what you have in life. Housing is absolutely the biggest part of your budget unless you're really extreme about saving or really extreme about paying off your debt. But for most people, housing is the most expensive portion of your budget, which means it is literally the best thing you can do for yourself financially to be within a reasonable amount for housing. And if you can get even less than these numbers, by all means, I would highly encourage it. Spend as little as you can to live in a comfortable house, neighborhood, etc. Keeping housing budget in line will be the best thing you can do for saving for your future or paying off your debt. If you find these videos interesting and informative, please click subscribe, as I will be uploading videos regularly. Have a good day. Bye.